Hi again then guys, and welcome to another installment of Rivals on Gran Turismo 6, and this particular Rivals matchup is between three vehicles, and we're kind of moving our way through different generations of hot hatch on Gran Turismo. And of course we've already covered the hot hatches of the early 2000s, stuff like the Golf R32, the Focus RS, the Audi S3, that kind of thing. Now though, we're moving on to kind of the mid to late-ish 2000s, kind of around 2008, that kind of time, with the Focus ST, the Megane RS, and the Volvo C30. Now, mechanically, the Volvo and the Ford are very similar. The Volvo is based on the Ford Focus ST platform, whereas the Megane is a little bit different. The Megane is personally by far my favourite of the three. I think most people seem to like the Ford the most of the three. So we'll drive each car on its own and then see how they compare. First up then we have the Megane RS. This is the most powerful of the three cars. All three vehicles are running nearly 500 horsepower, but this one is the closest to 500 horsepower with 493, and that's actually from the smallest engine of the three cars, a 2-litre turbo. That's pretty impressive. All three vehicles are front-wheel drive. They weigh a similar amount, and they actually have a similar amount of power, and funnily enough, a fairly similar amount of torque as well. So they are very well matched. As far as price, the Megane sits between the Volvo and the Ford. It's more expensive than the Focus, but not quite as expensive as the Volvo. And as I said, this is my personal favourite of the three cars. The reason why I like it more is primarily due to the looks. I think that the Megane has a very good look to it. It's relatively unique as far as hot hatches go. There's really not much else, if anything else, that looks like this generation of Megane on the market. I love the way the car performs. It's strong in a straight line, especially for acceleration mid-range. The handling is, at least for me personally, a joy to work with, and although it is definitely heavier than some smaller front-wheel drive hatches through the corners and is more inclined towards torque steer due to the higher torque and higher power output, it's not a difficult vehicle to drive. It's not quite as competitive as the newer Clio RS, but I still personally prefer it even over that car. Of the three, it's my favourite for sure, but let's next consider the Volvo. Now, as far as the Volvo goes, we already covered the fact that it does share some mechanical similarities, some mechanical components even, with the Focus. The same engine, I believe it also has the same chassis if memory serves, and it's kind of like a more funky looking version of the Focus ST. Personally, I like the Volvo a little bit more, but it's not so much down to the car, it's just because I like Volvo as a brand and I like to support them. In a similar way to how I like to support brands like Saab and Skoda as well. I like them because they're different, they're oddball, they're quirky. Now, the Volvo is kind of the weakest of the three in terms of track potential. It has, I would say, probably the best visual upgrades of the three, with the body kit, the rear wing, that kind of thing. But around the track, it just doesn't feel quite as adept as the Focus, which is strange, given how similar it is underneath. And despite the fact that it does share the same engine, a 2.5 litre straight 5, it's not as powerful, and it also doesn't have as much torque, kind of ironically, and kind of unfairly as well. The horsepower is only 1 less, but still, less is less, and the torque is significantly less, 12 foot-pounds lower than the Focus ST. So overall, the Volvo isn't a bad car, but it is the slowest of the three. So, what about the Ford? Well, the Focus ST is notable in this group for a couple of reasons. One, as I said, it's probably most people's first choice if you offered them the choice of the three cars, and you can understand why. The Ford Focus is known for being a good driver's hatch anyway, and when you make it a hot version, of course, it's going to be even better. Personally, I love the RS version of this Focus generation. I actually like the RS of this generation more than all of the others before and after it. But of course we don't have that car in the game. The ST, I've never been as much a fan of. I don't dislike the car, but it's not really spicy enough visually to me. The orange paint is about the spiciest thing about it, and it just doesn't look as good, in my opinion. It's a bit too understated in the hot hatch class. But, looks aside, the most notable thing about this car is it's the only one of the three, in a similar way to some of the other matches which we've had, that can be fitted with a flat floor. And although that may not seem fair, especially when you're comparing lap times, it's an advantage that's there to be used. So it is fair to use it, because after all, if you're looking to buy one, you need to know what kind of difference that can make. And it was the quickest of the three. Without the use of the flat floor, it was not as quick. So around this track it did make a significant difference, although it does make you slower in a straight line. So, which one wins on paper? Well, as you lay out the numbers of the three cars, as we always do on paper, you can start to see some ways which we've already discussed, such as power and torque, where a car will edge out another vehicle, sometimes by a small margin, sometimes by a pretty big one. As far as power, the margin isn't that big between them. But let's break it down, see which one gets the most points, because the Focus is of course the quickest, but let's see if it can carry that through to the most points. Well, first of all, we have the price, and the Focus does get the point there. Pretty impressively, is significantly cheaper than the other two as far as cheaper vehicles go. 32 grand is quite a lot better than the other two, 9 grand cheaper than the Megane, 10 grand cheaper than the Volvo. As far as engine capacity, well, we already said it shares the engine with the Volvo, that T5 engine, so of course it's exactly the same there, so they both get a point. As far as PP as well, this is significantly, as well as lap time, where that flat floor option really comes in handy, because it makes the fully tuned PP level of the Ford that much higher. 568 is significantly higher than the other two. Not so much without the flat floor, but with it, it makes a big difference. As far as power though, we already covered the fact that the Megane is the most powerful. All three have very impressive power though, and all three vehicles are among the most powerful hatches in the game, in fact. They're not the three most powerful, but they're definitely up there. Next up as far as torque, and this is where it gets interesting, is the Ford. It has 460 foot-pounds to 448 on the Volvo. So why is it so different despite having the same engine? Well, this is where it gets interesting, because although the power difference between the two is only 1 horsepower, the Volvo gets that 487 horsepower from the high-range turbo, whereas the Ford gets 488 from the mid-range turbo. And if you swap the turbos around, the numbers don't become equal. And primarily due to that use of the mid-range turbo, the Ford Focus does have quite a significant torque advantage, given that the mid-range turbo for the vast majority of cars in the game gives you the most torque. Interestingly, next up is the weight, and this is one which I personally found to be a bit surprising. Not necessarily recently, I've known it for a while, but looking at the three cars, I wouldn't suspect that the Megane was the lightest. It's quite a big, chunky looking vehicle. I would have probably given the edge maybe to the Volvo. Actually, it looks a little bit more compact, but actually the Volvo and the Ford weigh exactly the same, 1171 kilos, which is a relatively small amount more than the Megane, which is enough to of course give it the point. And as far as horsepower per tonne, well, the Megane is more powerful and lighter, so obviously it has the advantage there. But even again, between the Ford and the Volvo C30, it goes in favour of the Ford by a tiny, tiny margin. And although, as always, we do not give a point based on the lap time, because there are too many variables involved, tuning, driver, track, all that kind of thing, it is still interesting to note that primarily due to the flat floor, the Focus was the quickest, with a 121.9, then the Megane with a 122.2, and then the Volvo with a 123.2. So interesting to see what kind of a difference that flat floor makes, but at the same time, it wasn't that much quicker than the Megane, even with the use of that flat floor and with a much higher PP level. So the Megane should not be discounted. It's a very, very quick vehicle. But the question is, of course, where do they finish? Which one wins? Well, coming in third, probably not too surprisingly given the numbers, is the Volvo C30, with only 1 point to its name, and that point even it shares with the Ford, being engine capacity. Then, coming in second, is my personal favourite of the three with 3 points, the Megane. But coming in first with 4 points is the Focus ST. So this is one of those rare occasions in Rivals where the car which wins on paper is actually the quickest as well. That doesn't happen as often as you would probably expect it to. But overall, all three of these hatches are among the best hatches in the game for sure, especially if you factor in that straight line power, which many of the smaller hatches just don't have. So overall, if you buy any of these three cars, they will offer an interesting twist in their own way. They have their own personality, their own advantages for sure, and their own disadvantages. And so that's it for this particular episode. So I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.